Hi everyone, this is Jason Lupke, Global Solution Specialist with Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. Today we're here to continue our series on small group instruction, and specifically today we're going to be talking about the resources that we use for that small group instruction. Not just the teacher-led group, but also what are my other students doing during that time as well. Do you remember the story of the Barefoot Runner from the 1960 Olympic Games, Abebe Bikila? We talked about Abebe in our last episode about the needs assessment that we do and the data we collect about our students. You know what the running world learned about runners after Abebe won those 1960 games was that every runner has a different set of needs. Much like all of our students in our classrooms also have different needs. So in our previous video in the series, we talked about how we determine those needs and how we collect that data. If you haven't watched that video yet, I encourage you to go back and check it out. Today, we're going to talk about how we find those resources. So remember, when we look at and plan for small group instruction to be a core component of our lesson design, and by the way, that can be virtually just as well as it can be in a traditional setting. We have a few things that we need to consider, and we talked about those in our last episode. Remember, we talked about having a short whole group instruction time at the beginning of our lesson where we introduce a new concept. Then we do that data collection piece, the formative assessment. Today, we dig into that small group instruction and finding those resources. I'm really looking at 3 different types of things that are going on at the same time in my classroom. That is my teacher-led small group, where I, as the teacher, am addressing individual student needs. Then I've got the collaborative work that's going on in my classroom, where I've got pairs or small groups of students that are working together on projects and other activities. And then I also have my third portion of that time is my independent practice time. So let's talk about what each one of those looks like and what kind of resources I collect around those. I want to start with individual. So this is something that oftentimes we might overlook when we're focusing on that small group instruction. What can my individual students be working on? And you know, one of the challenges or struggles that sometimes we face as educators, when we know we want to work with those small groups of students, how do I find the resources that will meet the needs of my other students, that they can do independently, and that will be meaningful and beneficial to their learning? We don't want it to just be busy work, do we? So when we're thinking about those activities in a math classroom, I might take part of, or maybe even the whole homework assignment, and ask students to work on that in an activity that I would call on your own. That's an opportunity for them to practice and figure out what they might struggle with, so that maybe in that whole group wrap-up time at the end of the lesson, they could ask those questions. Or maybe even in the teacher-led small group, they could also ask those questions. In our next episode in the series, we're going to talk about some structures that we put into place for classroom management during this time. And we'll talk about a tool inside of that will help our students overcome challenges or obstacles that they might have during that independent practice. I might also, in my language arts classroom, do something as simple as independent reading time. This really is one of the most beneficial activities that can take place during that small group rotation that we do. The second set of activities that we can do during that time is cooperative or collaborative learning. You know, this is a great time for students to work on their ongoing or short-term projects and develop those collaborative skills. In math class, I might have my students engage in some meaningful math learning games, or maybe they quiz each other with flashcards. During science class, we'll get to have students work on inquiry-based projects or labs. Inside of my ELA classrooms, we might even have students read to one another, or maybe conduct peer revision or conferencing around our writing, or we might have them collaborate on an activity around a story. One of my favorite is an activity we have inside of our Into Reading program called Reading Remake, where we take a story and we develop something inside of that story. Okay, so finally, let's talk about the meat of what's going on during our small group time, and that is the teacher-led small groups. So during that teacher-led small group, I really need to focus in and hone in on the skills that my students need. This is the period of time where I can really accelerate student growth and achievement. So I've collected my data from my needs assessment, and I'm going to take that data and group my students. I recommend students in groups of somewhere between 3 to 6 students, grouped around similar needs. Inside of those groups, we're going to use reteaching activities and lessons. Remember that if students are struggling with a concept, they probably need it to be taught in a different way. Try coming up with visuals that might help students comprehend and grasp the concept. And as always, I really like the I do, we do, you do methodology. We call it the gradual release method of instruction. That's where we'll start that small group instruction with a little bit of reteaching and instruction. Then we offer an opportunity to practice together as a small group. And then we do that individual practice where we might do a turn and talk or ask the students to answer a problem on their paper and then show us their answer, and we work through that together. This should all be done in about a 10 to 15 minute time frame before we rotate and take on the next small group. Some great tools to use during this time would be flashcards, maybe picture books, any kind of hands-on material like maybe number cubes in math class, extra practice examples and or worksheets. If you happen to be an Into Reading or an Into Math customer, we have these really great resources called Tabletop mini lessons. We have a student-facing page on one side and then that teacher lesson reteach activity on the other side. Of course, during COVID-19 and our use of more virtual instruction, we have to be a little more creative around how we do small group instruction. Quite honestly, small group instruction is just as easy to pull off during this virtual instruction time as it is in the classroom. Instead of meeting whole group all the time, I'm just going to set up those small groups again around the needs of my students and do those activities that we've talked about already. Now, the key to all of this is to not overthink it. Small group instruction is really about having the resources and tools for all of these different areas. Once I've got those resources in my hands as a teacher, and it's very likely you already have those resources, it's just about structuring my classroom. And we're going to talk about that in our next episode in the series. Really, guys, just remember, we can take any activity that we might use in our classroom already around whole group instruction or anything else, and we can make it a small group activity. This is Jason Lupke with Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. Remember to like our channel, subscribe, and please give comments and ask questions underneath the video. I'll see you next time where we talk about structures and classroom management for small group instruction.